Hello, welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren, and each week at this time, Plugged In examines U.S. policy, questioning those who make and shape policy, and you're going to hear various opinions about that policy. And by being plugged in, you have an opportunity to speak up and get involved. We are live on Facebook at Voice America and want your comments and questions. Today, our topic, guns protests in the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Enacted in 1791, it reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Recently, however, student protesters filled the streets of the U.S. Capitol demanding tighter gun control laws, and they weren't alone. About 800 similar protests happened throughout the nation. Voice of America student journalist Isabella Basco and Melissa Newcomb report.
High school students took a stand against gun violence last weekend, organizing the March for Our Lives protest in Washington, D.C., and sister marches around the U.S. and world. The march was in response to the murder of 17 students in a February shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. While the movement was created by students, people of all ages and backgrounds came to Washington to participate in the protest for stronger gun control laws. Cameron Katsky survived the Parkland shooting.
My generation, having spent our entire lives seeing mass shooting after mass shooting, has learned that our voices are powerful and our votes matter.
He and other student leaders expressed disappointment at the lack of action taken by Congress.
Politicians, either represent the people or get out.
Prakash Saraf, who is 45, came from Baltimore with his 10-year-old son, Neev Saraf.
Every morning we get up, we are scared about our kids, if they're going to come back home. And that's one of the reasons we're here.
I have a feeling that will happen soon, where my generation will have to clean up all of the mess.
The March for Our Life student organizers believe that cleanup begins with tighter restrictions on the purchases of guns. Their website published a petition which stated 3 legislative goals: a ban on the sale of assault weapons, prohibition of the sale of high-capacity magazines, and a requirement for intensive background checks for the sale of every gun. Leland Miller is a 30-year-old carpenter from Kentucky. Though he is a hunter and a gun owner, he supports an assault weapons ban.
I believe in the lawful, support and defense of yourself. However, when we're talking about AR-15s and automatic weapons, we're not exactly talking about self-defense anymore. We're talking about an offense.
Tina Hobson is an 88-year-old political activist from Washington, D.C., who came to the march with other residents from her assisted living facility.
We felt that every generation should participate. It started with the Vietnam War, and we just went to every protest that we could. Protests matter because they educate people.
Regardless of age or opinion, march attendees show no signs of giving up, and even the youngest participants, like 11-year-old Safka Klein, are eager to help.
We're the next generation, and by doing all of this, we're showing that we know what we want to do with the world ahead of us.
Melissa Newcomb and Isabella Basco for VOA News, Washington.
And we have with us the 2 VOA student journalists who were covering that historic event from the ground. Isabella Basco is from Georgetown University, and next to her we have Melissa Newcomb from Nazareth College in Rochester, New York. Thank you both for joining us so much. First to you, Isabella, what struck you the most about the protest?
What struck me the most about the protest was it was filled with all people from all generations, all backgrounds, all races. But really what was amazing about this whole protest was that it's the post-millennials. It's not even millennials, Greta. It's post-millennials who are really taking the reins and really lecturing the adults and lecturing those people in charge, saying, this is a problem, we need to do something about it. And I'll tell you a few things about this generation. I looked up some factoids that are interesting about them. This is the most diverse generation, more diverse than millennials in U.S. history. Race, socioeconomic background, especially race. They say now by 2050, Spanish might become the new language of the United States. You have diversity in the sense that they think they think more broadly about a lot of world issues and U.S. issues. A lot of baby boomers that I interviewed, they weren't featured in the package, but a lot of baby boomers say this generation is a lot brighter and more in tune with current events than others.
Melissa, what makes you think, if you do think it, that this is not just sort of a passing fancy in reaction to a catastrophic event? I mean, are these students after going out, are they serious? Are they going to be talking about this, and are they going to go to the polls when they turn 18?
I hope so. That's the plan. I know that there's a preconceived notion that our generation and younger seems to not really be informed on what's going on. And this march has definitely proved that they are informed and they are ready to take action. However, only 50% of young voters vote when the polls come out. I think if they want to continue this movement and see real action as they seem to, then that should continue over.
Was this your first protest? You covered it, but was this your first?
No, I was at the Women's March.
All right, how about you? Was this your first?
No, I reported on the Women's March last year.
All right, let me go back to you, Melissa. Melissa, there was a vast age group difference. I mean, in the package that you reported on, there was a woman who was in her 80s. Tell me about what you saw on the ground there in terms of age.
Everybody. There was everyone. I interviewed a woman with her very 2-month-old young son, and then a 98-year-old woman who had started the movement at her nursing home. I think every generation wants to help out, and they're all finding their place within this movement.
Did you find, Isabella, that there were counter-protesters? Often when one goes out, I mean, obviously all these people were gathered and they had the same focus, but did you find counter-protesters there?
At this protest right here? So there are definitely people who are pro-gun. We did not see, we did interview people that are hunters, that are rifle owners, that do support the Second Amendment, but they were still there in support, obviously, of just legislation that will heavily limit the buying of assault rifles. No one that we interviewed is against the Second Amendment. We had a lot of them are actually gun owners. Some of them don't own a gun. They just are supportive of the three objectives of the march.
Well, there are hundreds of thousands across the country who are protesting. Of course, some students disagree with the protest. Let's listen.
School is not a place to make a political statement, and I get their intended meaning, like to remember the 17 that have fallen, but I feel like they kind of went a little too far.
I just feel that this walkout, it misrepresented the issue of these shootings and this kind of image behind firearms.
Guns don't kill people. People kill people. People have bad intentions.
Bad people are gonna do bad things no matter what, and the only way to combat that is by not taking away our given right to protect ourselves and our family and our property.
Mayor Catherine Pugh of Baltimore, Maryland worked with donors to bus 3,000 Baltimore students to the march. I sat down with her to talk not just about legal guns, but also about the toll illegal guns are taking on her city.
So we don't even have a gun shop in Baltimore City. It is the trading of guns for drugs. It is allowing guns to flow from state to state, from city to city. It's just too much. And so these, the gun laws, to me, don't protect the innocent. 89% of the individuals who come in contact with the criminal justice system in our city not only are those who carry guns, but they also become the victims and they're the victimizers. And so we have too many people who are caught up in the criminal justice system that have too many illegal guns on our streets.
So what do we do? I mean, it seems like an insurmountable problem because we've got so many guns, we've got a lot of crime. What's the solution? I assume it's pieces of solution.
Well, first of all, I think part of it is, why are people committing crimes? You know, why are people stooping to violence in order to solve their problems? Whether it is the need for drugs or whether it is trying to get additional monies to take care of yourself, to take care of a family. You know, what are we doing, the richest country in America, that doesn't provide jobs and opportunities for people across this nation? And so I think that that is part of the issue. But at the same time, I don't think that violence is the answer. And part of it is how we're dealing with violence in our schools, violence in our communities. What are we telling people? How are we treating people? We've gotten to the point now where violence is an everyday occurrence in cities and states throughout this country, and people don't look at the impact that it's having on our younger and younger generations. And that's why I was so enthusiastic about this march that took place here in Washington, D.C., because we've got to get our children thinking differently about violence in our communities.
You know, it's sort of interesting. The march was predominantly, at least, was driven by young people.
Yes.
Young people, most of them can't drive, can't vote. And you know, I look and here they're trying to school us. You know, my generation, generation below, is that you know the violence you talk about was created in our generation.
Absolutely. And I think what they're saying is when they start seeing their counterparts being killed, when urban children are hearing gunshots every single day, they're saying enough is enough. You know, this kind of violence only begets violence, and it's having an impact mentally, socially, and physically on these young people. And they're having an impact on our society. And it is time that America takes a step back and look at these gun laws and look at the making of guns in our country. I was so glad to hear that one of our biggest gun makers had gone bankrupt. You know, wouldn't that be great if all of them went bankrupt?
Is Baltimore tough enough on people who have access to guns illegally and get picked up, or using guns that never should have had guns?
Well, let me just say 89% of the individuals who come in contact with the criminal justice system have been in contact with the criminal justice system 9 to 11 times. Apparently, our laws aren't strong enough. Apparently, we're allowing those who commit these crimes to come back and forth in and out of the criminal justice system. And so I think you have to attack the root cause of the problem, but at the same time, you can't allow your community to be riveted by individuals who consistently commit crimes. What
part does poverty play in this, or even you go to watch a movie, and we have shoot 'em up movies here. I mean, we've seen lots of violent movies. You can see them on television. Play any role in this?
Well, I think that what our children see every day does play a role in what we're experiencing. But I do think that economic opportunity has its place as it relates to why people are committing crimes. And I'm not just talking about gun violence. I'm talking about drug addiction. I'm talking about all of these issues that impact communities and neighborhoods. We have to look at what's causing the problem. You know, is it unemployment? Is it drug addiction? Is it mental health issues? Is it homelessness? All of these things, as a society, we have a responsibility to address. You know, as a mayor, I focus on all of these issues, whether it's homelessness, whether it is unemployment, and how do we become more equal and just in our communities. And for too many years, for too many decades, the justice system and the economic system are not working together. When we think about the inequality in education, the inequality in economic opportunity, the lack of inclusion and diversity in cities that are majority people of color, you know, don't have access to the jobs and the opportunities, and so we have a responsibility as leaders to level the playing field.
310 million or so guns on the street. The estimate is anywhere from 18 to 15 million of them are assault weapons. What do we do about that? I mean, even that category, 8 to 15 million assault weapons. What would you do, if anything, about those? They're out there.
Well, I think Congress has to step up to the plate. I mean,
have they disappointed you?
Certainly, they've disappointed us all. I mean, they disappointed the young people. They've disappointed us. They've disappointed me. I mean, too many assault weapons. Not enough background checks.
What would the background checks do? Because a lot of these people buy the guns. A lot of them, not just the school things, but a lot of them buy guns legally, and then they go out and use them.
Well, but a lot of them don't. And at the same time, we're allowing young folks in Florida. This was a young person who accessed a gun from somebody else, who walked into a classroom and shot 17 people.
So no background check would have stopped that?
Well, mental health services may have, because obviously there's something wrong there.
Well, there have been a lot of calls about this person. Mm-hmm. I mean, this killer in Florida. There were several, you know, we're always told after 9/11, if you see something, say something. A number of things were actually said, and nobody did anything.
And we're not doing enough. You know, and that's why I say when you think about these young people hearing violence every day, whether it is through the media or through their own experiences, we have to ask the question, what impact is that having on the minds of people who, as you would say, watch violent cartoons or watch violent interactions, whether it's the media or new technology or whatever. What impact is that having? And what are we doing to curb that impact? Is that mental health services? Is it counselors in our schools? Is it conversations with our young people that we need to have? Or conversations with each other? I mean, back in the day, you know, if you got upset with somebody, you might end up in a fist fight. But today you pull out a gun or you stab somebody, something's wrong with that. And those conversations aren't being had. That the conversation around violence in our society has to be elevated. because we've got to change the outlook for young people and for ourselves, that violence is not the way. Those conversations aren't being had every day. Not in our living rooms, not at our dinner tables, not in our schools, not in our churches, and not in our communities, and we need to have those conversations.
And it's unthinkable that we now have people under the age of 18 telling us adults that we really have failed.
And we have. We failed them, we failed ourselves, we failed society. But more importantly, I don't think that we're a lost cause. I think that there's opportunity to have conversations, there's opportunity to curve laws, there's opportunities for us to take a look at our country and say, you know, we can do better than this.
And we're joined by two high school students. Michael Solomon is a sophomore at Springbrook High School in Maryland and co-president of Montgomery County Students for Gun Control. Paulo Arosa is a junior at Potomac Falls High School in Virginia. He's the chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom chapter at his school. He's been working with other students to arrange panel discussions on the Second Amendment at his school. Welcome, both of you.
Thank
Paul,
you.
first to you. What is this discussion you're trying to provoke at school about the Second Amendment? When we talk about Second Amendment, we're talking about the right to bear arms.
See, my thing with the Second Amendment is it was given to us through in the Constitution, and we really want to secure this this right, which where these regulations that students are pushing for with these walkouts. I think that it kind of strips us of our right to bear arms, which is a God-given right, an unalienable right. And I believe that we need to do all that we can to defend it.
All right. What about the problem is that guns are being used to commit such, such violence like happened in Parkland?
Well, the gun violence that is happening there, I believe that these problems can't be solved through gun control. This is we have to look at it holistically. Like, we have to see the bullying. There's family issues, multiple things that go into these shootings. And someone who is trying to commit evil will commit evil regardless of any barriers that we put in front of them, like gun control.
Michael, where are you on gun control in this country?
Well, I feel like gun control is a necessary step that we have to take in order to prevent these senseless killings like the one that happened in Parkland, Florida, from happening. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that gun violence does not stay in school shootings, right? Gun violence happens disproportionately in minority communities. So I believe that gun control is completely necessary, and looking at all the other top nations around the world that have implemented gun control into their policies, and looking at like Australia and Japan and how they've been able to decrease the amount of mass shootings that they have in their nations. I mean, I feel like it's just common sense at this point.
Let me ask you multiple questions, Michael. Sure. Number one is, would you take away guns from people who have them? That's the first question. Number two is that there are about 325 million people in this country, and there are about 310 million guns already out there. So I don't know what you're going to do with those guns.
Okay. So, well, first of all, you said, would we take away guns from people who already have them? At this point, there are far too many people who own guns who shouldn't have guns. There are people who have criminal records, who are known to be domestic abusers. There are people who are known to have mental health issues. I mean, if anybody believes that those people should have weapons of destruction in their possession, I mean, I feel like it's just common sense that they shouldn't be able to have those things. If I can't buy a beer at my local store, but someone who has a record of mental health issues, domestic abuse, and even a criminal record, if they can go and purchase a gun, then I feel like that's a big problem that we have, and that's something that we have to do.
Do you worry that they can buy one from a neighbor? You know,
well,
I mean, like if they created a law which said that people with mental health problems can't buy a gun at a store, but then goes down the street and buys one from a neighbor, like you'd buy cocaine from a neighbor, that's also illegal.
Well, the thing is, the first step that you have to take is restricting access for those people, right? At this point, if someone who does have mental health issues, if they are able to purchase a gun, the first step we have to take is say, no, you can't purchase a gun legally if you have mental health problems. That's the initial step that you have to take.
Paul, do you feel like adults, I mean, people older than you, have let you down? I mean, I look at this terrible shooting in Parkland, and the FBI had 2 notices that there was a problem, 2 red flags, and there had been other complaints about this killer, and yet this killer was able to get guns and to go in and slaughter these students.
Now, I think the FBI really did drop the ball in this instance. There were around, I think, 39 police calls to his house. There were 2 notices, one from a YouTube comment saying I want to be a professional school shooter. Like, that is something that you have to look at, and that is a red flag. It should have come up in his background check with, but it didn't when they submitted to the FBI. So I think
so maybe there is a break in the whole process. I mean, so you still don't want any restrictions on guns in this country?
I do not want any restrictions on guns.
You want anyone can have a gun any kind. How about assault weapons?
What do you define as an assault weapon?
Well, how do I assault it? I mean, I don't know. You tell me what you define it as.
Well, honestly, I don't think anything is. I don't think an assault weapon is a. I think it's a made-up term.
What about a weapon that you can use a bump stock and make it almost an automatic weapon? Use a bump stock accelerates the firing.
So the Second Amendment was created for self-defense or self-preservation against a tyrannous government. I believe that having these weapons are necessary for your self-preservation. Against
our government?
Against our government.
Do you think that if you have an automatic weapon in your house that you could possibly withstand the U.S. Army coming down on you?
Well, I mean, you can look at Tennessee, the Battle of Athens. There was a small town where they felt there was corruption in the local government. They came out guns blazing, and they actually made change.
All right, let me go back to Michael. Paul. When you look at the Second Amendment, and it says it's pretty plain. It says right to bear arms. And we hold our Constitution in great awe, and we don't like to use restrictions. You still want a restriction you think that they should legislate restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, the Second Amendment says, it talks about a well-regulated militia, right? And it says the right to bear arms, but we also have to look at some parts of the Constitution in historical context. I mean, the time at which the Second Amendment was written, it's a time that no one even imagined the type of technological developments that would be. Well,
you could say that the same about the First Amendment, free speech. You could say that about every one of our amendments.
Of course, but I mean, free speech is not as free speech doesn't allow people to purchase weapons of destruction. I mean, when we talk about guns, we're talking about tools that were made for killing, for shooting. I mean, that's their primary purpose. So we have to acknowledge that.
Do you see any appetite for changing the Constitution rather than sort of legislating or making laws? I mean, it's a huge task in this country to change the Constitution. And last time it was done, it was the early 1990s. I mean, it's not easy to do. But yeah. Why not change the Constitution? Too slow? Too hard?
I do know of a lot of people who believe that we actually have to go to the Constitution and change some of the language that's in it in order to go forward with gun control. But I feel like at this point in this political climate, that's something that's a little bit unrealistic.
Briefly, are the students in your high school talking about this all the time?
Oh yeah, there was. They had their own walkout. It wasn't school sponsored, so they went out for 17 minutes. But I've been engaging in conversations with many of the high school Democrats of America at my school.
Is it a healthy discussion, or is it sort of the mean, nasty, snarky stuff that many of us adults are having?
See, that's the thing about our generation. I want our generation to be different from the generations before us, where you see on the news there's people yelling at each other, just arguing. But I try to have conversations. I try to spark conversations where change can actually happen.
You think more of your classmates are going to vote when they turn 18? I mean, are they engaged?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, we've seen from this movement a huge, mass mobilization of young people, right? And when you talk about voting, I think that's extremely important, because while civic engagement and rallying and marches, while they're extremely important, you can't really do anything unless you have the people you want in elected office. So now, in our next steps from the march, both in local level and national level, we are working on getting young people to register to vote, so that come November they will be ready.
Agree?
I think it's wonderful that these kids are going out, participating in democracy, really, going out, practicing their First Amendment rights, and I want them all to be voting. It's a good idea for us to be involved in what we want and what we want to change.
You know what I find disappointing? Is that my generation has not made safe schools for your generation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable to me that that a school could be dangerous. Absolutely unthinkable. I mean, the worst that happened to us is we got yelled at by the nuns, because we were late with our homework.
Slap on
the. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that's stunning. Do you have metal detectors at your schools?
No. I think that metal detectors would actually be a great addition to schools. Like you see schools in LA and DC. Hardly any school shootings happen there, and there are metal detectors there. And I think that would help a lot.
All right. Well, thank you for the very healthy discussion. Thank you both. That's all the time we have. I'd like to thank my guest, Michael Solomon, sophomore at Springbrook High School in Maryland, and Paolo Rosa, a junior at Potomac Falls High School in Virginia. And one last word about these protests. Check out the crowd. It is huge. Hundreds of thousands taking to the streets, peacefully protesting. And not just in Washington, D.C., but across the nation. And think about it. Every single person in these protests has an absolute right to gather and peacefully protest our government. And as I look at these crowds in this protest, or any protest, regardless of the cause of the protest or who is protesting, I'm reminded once again what a great nation America is. Doesn't mean we could not do better. Of course we can. But think this. Not every nation around the globe allows protests of its government. In many nations, you dare to protest the government, you face arrest, and the news organizations are shut down to report it. But not here. America protects the right to protest, the right to free press, the right to free speech, the right to gather. It's right there in our Constitution. Americans have an absolute right to take to the streets peacefully, to tell the government peacefully, we don't like what you are doing. That right is essential to freedom, and we are so proud of this important right. Thank you very much for joining us. It's all the time we have for today. Stay plugged in by liking us on Facebook at Voice of America. You can also like my Facebook page at facebook.com/Greta and follow me on Twitter @Greta. Thanks for being plugged in.